Hello, I'm Neil Whelan and welcome to the Wesleyan Podcast. In this week's episode, we hand over to Wilf Morley from our People Development team, who has been talking to award-winning financial planner and certified financial coach, Catherine Morgan. They'll be talking about financial behaviours, the spending habits people develop when they're young and how they can impact personal finances later in life, and ultimately, what can be done about it. As always with our podcasts, this is just for information purposes and shouldn't be taken as financial advice. You can find out more about how to get that from us at the end of the show. But for now, let's hear from Catherine. And first up, Wilf.
So I know we've discussed financial behaviours recently, and I just really wanted to share with the audience a little bit about what that might actually mean. So could you tell me a bit about it, please?
Yeah, of course. It's really interesting, isn't it? Like some of you will hear financial behaviours and think like, what on earth is that all about? And then others will be like what? How is this relevant to personal finance? And I'm a massive believer that in order to live the life that all of us want to live, you know, where we have enough money to last us the rest of our lives so we can do all the things that are important to us in the here and now and in the future, I'm a big believer that the actual challenge around how we can best manage our personal finances isn't necessarily in the lack of financial education, because let's face it, most of us did not have any financial education growing up around money. Yep. And so what happens is our financial behaviours, what we do or don't do around money, ultimately come down to how much we know about money and our beliefs and mindset. So let me just talk a little bit about what I mean by that. So when I refer to financial behaviours, having financial education is not the only answer. It's not the only solution, because of course, we all know logically we should be spending less than we earn. We all know logically that we should be managing our finances within our budgets. We should be investing when we're in our early 20s. We know all of these things logically, but yet we don't always follow what we should do. And this is the challenge, is because we can know everything there is to know about money, but still not follow advice. Like some of you listening to this may have seen a financial advisor in the past. You may have a relationship with a financial planner, and yet they may give you advice to gift money out of your estate or take some risks with your cash. And there's something there that feels jaded, it feels unsafe, it feels uncomfortable, it feels unfamiliar. And that's really what I'm talking about when I refer to financial behaviours. It's how we behave is very much driven by how we feel and how we think about money. And how we feel and how we think about money is driven by our relationship with money, which is like the oldest relationship we have with anything ever in our lives. But yet, how often do we really think about, what is my relationship with money? How do I behave around money? Where does that come from? What influences our relationship with money? That's the bit that we focus on, is about combining the knowledge with actually understanding how our relationship with money serves us and how it sabotages our success.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, I suppose it's all a collection of your experiences throughout your life that really builds these financial behaviours, so to speak, Catherine. You've just mentioned ones there about sabotaging. So what sort of, could you give us some examples about behaviours that you see where people are sabotaging just through behavioural finance?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of them. The most common ones are if our financial behaviours are not aligned, then we make poor decisions that are not logical. We make decisions based on our emotional response. So, for example, an overspender, let's say, may know logically that they shouldn't be spending this money because they don't actually have the money, and they may be in reoccurring debt cycles, for example, and really using money as a tool to make themselves feel better because of the emotional kind of dopamine hit that we get when we spend money. It could also appear in maybe not sticking to a financial plan. So you might have a financial plan in place, and then you come up for your annual review and you haven't done any of the things that you were going to do, or you end up sabotaging yourself by going against the advice of an expert. The other thing is you might not make any decisions at all. So we kind of bury our heads in the sand. Yeah. One of the biggest ones I see actually is where we make financial decisions based on other people's expectations, other people's values, other people's beliefs, where we're essentially just trying to keep up with the Joneses and compare ourselves to everybody else You know, we might follow people that are very wealthy and successful and try and apply the same things to us, and it doesn't work. And that's because everybody is individual. Everybody has their own unique blueprint with money. Like even overspenders, for example, I was a massive overspender in my 20s. I lived my entire 20s in £30,000 worth of debt as a financial advisor. You can imagine the guilt and the shame associated with giving advice to everybody else and not following it myself. And so even as an overspender, my relationship with money may be different to another overspender. The reason why I was overspending may be very different to another overspender. And of course, we have to be very careful to the language that we choose to use around money, because it's that self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like if we call ourselves an overspender or spontaneous with money or risk, not a risk taker, I'm not a risk taker with money, then we just look for recurring evidence in our world to support those beliefs, because that's the brain's job. The brain's job is to keep us safe. It's to keep things familiar to us. So those are kind of some of the, when I talk about self-sabotaging behaviors, those are some of the things that we know don't really do us good financially, but yet it still happens.
Yeah, it's interesting that, because it's that confirmation bubble people can get stuck in, really, isn't it? Where you only see the evidence that supports your own mindset, which then further deepens your own mindset on it, really, doesn't it? So
yeah, 100%, which is why like one of the best things that we can do to change those sabotaging behaviors is awareness. It's bringing awareness to, well, first of all, what are my money narratives? What are my core beliefs around money? Because most of them actually don't even belong to us.
Yeah,
like
they're just inherited from others.
Yeah, they've been inherited from parents, past generations. That there's loads of studies in financial psychology around how through epigenetics, actually, this is some of the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, who talks about epigenetics and the science behind how patterns of behaviors and habits are literally passed through our DNA, through our genetics. You know, it's a bit like a dentist, for example, who's looking at somebody's teeth. Your teeth, and actually I've never had this conversation with a dentist, so this is probably a really bad example. I'm assuming here that our dental structure isn't just of how we're born, it's through our DNA, it's through past generations. You know, you can see from like similar jawlines, can't you, of all like your previous generations. So actually I'd love to have that conversation with a dentist one day. But
there might be one listener that reaches out to you.
There might be. Reach out and let me know. As an example, that is passed through our DNA. It's passed through epigenetics. So that's really interesting, because I bet if you took a moment to think about your family generation, your parents or your grandparents, what were their core beliefs around money and how has that been passed through to you? So, for example, my nan, God bless her, she's still alive. She's 96 and still kicking. And, you know, she was she was a war baby. And everything during the war was about a lack of, not enoughness, rationing, not buying things new, but just repairing things that were broken. You think about how they treated money in those days in British culture, then those beliefs would have formed her core behaviors around money. And consequently, Absolutely. Of course, my mum would have experienced that as a young child, and then her beliefs would have been formed, and her beliefs then would have been passed through to my beliefs. And so that whole awareness piece around our own relationship with money and how that's been carried through generationally, we've all established our relationship with money by the age of 7.
Yeah, crikey.
Which is really it's fascinating, isn't it? Because in that imprinting period between the age of birth and 7, we actually operate in a completely theta state of learning. So our brain actually is in a completely theta state, which means that everything we learn, the brain takes as complete fact. It doesn't know how to differentiate between fact and fiction, what's right and what's not right, truth and non-truth. So when we hear or observe things around us at that age, the brain is like a sponge, it just saps up all that information. And so of course, as adults now, our core beliefs, our brain thinks are true. So when we look at things like money doesn't grow on trees, or you have to work hard to make money, those are big core beliefs around money. Our brain will literally flood the amygdala part of the brain, which deals with emotions around, well, you can't possibly drop a day a week in your business because you have to work hard to make money. And so it will try and self-sabotage, even though you know it's probably the better thing to do, and we all want that, but it will always try to protect you based on those core beliefs.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was just speaking to a client on Monday who was in that concept stage of going, I want to drop another day, but it's going to result in less money. But it was trying to get the concept across, but could it increase your happiness? Because how much do you really need to do what you want to do? And it was a really interesting conversation when we got into it. I know you've just been talking about, obviously, the way that it passes down and nature and nurture, and we know that all impacts our behaviours, not just from a financial point of view. I have heard you talk previously about the differences between men and women, and I know it's going to be a bit stereotypical, but could you just tell us a little bit more about that when it comes to finances, please? Because I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm quite... the way I think that we look at money, I think needs to be inclusive. And actually, the less we talk about men and women, I think the better, because sometimes we can end up kind of segregating ourselves into these kind of boxes of men are like this and women are like this. And actually what's super interesting for me is Starling Bank did some research. Actually, these are an online challenger bank. They did some research around something called their Make Money Equal campaign. And they looked at all the research around how the media communicates to men and how the media communicates to women around money. And it was so interesting. There were stats out there around, and we've actually done a podcast on our own podcast about this recently, that like the media talks to men about status and wealth and investing, and they talk to women about spending money on clothes and shoes and handbags, and don't be frivolous with your money, and really quite derogatory and not inclusive at all. But there is some research to show that typically men are driven by status, and women tend to be enablers or people pleasers around money. So I think a lot of this comes from the kind of the DNA, the generational, nurture nature discussion, and the hunter gatherer. And, for a lot of men, they do feel quite status driven around money because they feel like they have to be the main provider in their families. They want to be the main provider in their families. And sometimes when that balance of power, if you like, is shifted in the relationship, where perhaps the woman is bringing in more money than the man, it can actually create a lot of resentment or resistancy from the man in the relationship. Not always, but often. And I think that just goes back to generationally that men typically brought most of the wealth into the household, and now we're starting to see that change. More than 50% of wealth now is held by women. There are more women launching new businesses than ever before. And for women, I think from the research I've read, it's often suggested that women tend to be natural caregivers, and therefore they look after everybody else's needs before their own. And we know that a woman's life cycle is different to a man's. Typically, women have to look after aged parents. Again, not always, but it tends to be the women that have to leave their jobs early. It tends to be women that leave for a period of time from work to look after children. So we have a different life cycle with our finances, perhaps, than a man does. And this is why I think it's so important to have this conversation about ensuring that all genders, men and women, are in a position where they're building towards financial independence for themselves, so that they're not codependent on anybody or anything. Because there will be times when we go through significant transitions in our life, whether that's having a family, being made redundant, going through a divorce, losing a loved one. All of these things happen. And that's why I think it's less about men versus women, more about, well, let's keep this conversation inclusive, and let's harbor some really good conversations to make sure that people at home can have positive conversations about money and not have arguments around money.
Fantastic.
And that's something that we teach this in our financial coaching training program with advisors. How do you hold space for couples to have positive relationships around money? Because we know that that's the biggest cause of divorce in this country is around money. Which is interesting, right? Because money in itself is just money. It's like it's just a piece of paper. It's a physical coin. But we give so much power and emotion to money that it then creates challenges in relationships. I suppose
partly of just what's left unsaid and what's left in the head and what's being thought about in the head without necessarily being communicated a lot of the time. So it is that inclusive approach, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when it comes to relationships, often if we're actually attracted naturally to somebody who has the opposite relationship to money to us, which I find really fascinating. So kind of we're shooting ourselves in the foot, really, that we're kind of giving ourselves a hard time to start with when entering a relationship. But, if one of you is a high planner, for example, and one of you is super spontaneous, then of course you're going to get conflict in a relationship around money. But what's important to remember is that there's no right or wrong. And each of you will bring different things to the relationship when it comes to money. And each of you will have different values. Each of you will have a different relationship with money. And it's therefore important, and even as a financial planner, to recognize that it's not always about having joint goals and joint visions and joint events in your life that you both want to reach at the same time. How often do we naturally just assume that Mr. and Mrs. are going to retire at the same time? Or at the standard age of 65 or 60, we have to go deeper than that to really understand what's important to the individual as well as to the couple in their relationship.
Fantastic. Great points there, Catherine. So just about the financial behaviours in general then, because we've gone through quite a bit there. If there's anybody out there thinking, I am a bit of an overspender, I am a little bit of a retail therapist, or any other financial habits that they might be spotting and starting to just be a little bit more self-aware about, what would be the couple of main steps that you would suggest for them to help break that cycle?
I think it depends on your relationship with money. The steps you take if you're an emotional spender is very different to the steps that you might take if you're struggling with another area of your finances in terms of your behaviors. I think generically, like across all of the different common challenges we have with our relationship with money, the tips I would give there, the first one is what I would call get financially naked. Like this is bringing a little bit of fun to money. It's about exploring, if we were to literally strip everything back bare, what is important to you in the context of money? What is important to you in the context of your relationship, your career, your children, and really digging deep into your desires? Because I think a lot of the time when we talk about goals are very fixed, a specific moment in time, and quite masculine actually to think about goal planning. Whereas if we were to just soften that and think about intentions, what are your intentions for the year ahead, for the next 2 years ahead, the next 3 years ahead? And how do you want to be feeling next year? People are often, particularly people who are right brain centered, will be very feeling based, which is very much doing with the right hand part of our brain, not the logical left hand part of our brain. So when we're thinking about financial goals for the year ahead, for example, really think about what are the deep level desires, not the surface level goals. So when we say things like, I want financial freedom, or I want to have a holiday next year, I want to put my kids through university, I want to be able to retire at the age of 50. Those for me are surface level goals.
Yeah.
So getting financially naked for me is A, about understanding your numbers. B is about understanding your relationship with money and creating a plan with your financial planner based on your relationship with money. And 3 then is about really digging deep into your deep level values and intentions, not the shallow ones. So my husband and I had this conversation last night as an example, where he was like what was important to me was living by the sea. And when I dug deeper, we recently moved to Jersey in the Channel Islands. When I dug deeper, I thought, what is it about living by the sea that is so important? And I dug deeper. So what is important about living by the sea? Like space, like spaciousness, just being able to look out into the ocean. Well, what's important about looking into the ocean? Well, time to do nothing, like no phones, no technology, nothingness, like nothing. what's important about nothingness. And it really was, if you keep drilling and drilling further and further down, quite a good analogy for a dentist, drilling and drilling and drilling, then what's right underneath that surface? If you strip everything back, get financially naked, what's right at the core of that? What is that emotion that you're seeking? Because often it is happiness, security, safety. It might be expansion. It might be freedom, but keep going and going and going until you can literally go no further. And then use that as your motivation to help you create a financial plan and build in financial products that are going to be right for you based on that deep core need, rather than just setting surface level goals that ultimately we just pluck out of thin air most of the time, because we haven't really spent the time really thinking about what are the deep desires that we want money to enable us to be able to do.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that, Catherine. Just lastly, I know that you've got a book coming out very shortly. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, thank you. So it feels so weird to talk about the book before it's actually happened yet. So, but yes, on the 9th of December this year, I'm releasing my book, which is called It's Not About the Money. You can hop on our waitlist actually at catherinemorgan.com/book. Or depending on when you're listening to this, it may already be available. So just come over to the website, and we're actually giving the book away for free. You guys just pay postage and packaging, because we want to get this book into as many hands as possible, whether that's children or families or for yourself, because I really believe that the more we can focus on our behaviors and habits around money, particularly for the younger generation, the more I think that will really help us to look at money through a different lens. And that's really what I hope this book will do.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much for your time there tonight, Catherine. It's been really interesting talking to you. And I wish you the very best for the launch of the book there.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Wilf. Lovely to speak with you.
And that's our show for this week. Thank you to Wilf and Catherine. If you're interested in hearing more from Catherine, you can download her podcast, In Her Financial Shoes, from all the usual providers. And, as she said, her new book, It's Not About the Money, is published on the 9th of December, with more on that at her website, catherinemorgan.com. To find out more about us here at Wesleyan and to talk to someone about financial advice, check out our New Look website at wesleyan.co.uk and follow us on Twitter at Wesleyan, and search for us on Facebook, LinkedIn and Instagram. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean and Audible. But that's it for now. So until next time, thanks for listening.